So this is more grammar discussion. I had linked a Stack Exchange in a previous FI post, which was discussing the fine details of a case where the answerer was saying that you could use a gerund or a participle and it might seem very similar, but the grammatical analysis was completely different. So I'll just go over this in the Safari window because it's a bit more readable. So the first example the answerer discusses is, the likelihood of my doing this is small. And he says, in this example, doing this is a gerund phrase. My modifies the gerund phrase. The modified gerund phrase is the object of the preposition of. And so you have the core of the sentence, the likelihood, subject, is verb, small, complement, because small is modifying the likelihood. But then you have this prepositional phrase, and we have to figure out how to analyze this. So how do we do that? Well, of is the preposition. Okay, now this is where it starts to get tricky. And so this guy's theory is, doing this is a gerund phrase, which means this whole thing is functioning as a noun. And so, in a standard sort of analysis, I guess you would say this is the object of the gerund. Although I'm starting to doubt that sort of analysis, but just looking at it in the conventional way. So this is functioning as a noun, and then my is telling us something about this noun. And gerunds can function as nouns. That's what they are. They're a verbal which functions as a noun. Ends in ing. But then we have this very similar case. The likelihood of me doing this is small. And you might think, well, so is that the same thing? Grammatically. Because the meaning, you could read these as essentially the same, essentially saying the same thing, but grammatically the reading is very different. So the guy says, in this example, doing this is a participial phrase. So the analysis is, so the rest of the sentence is the same in terms of the basic structure, but then me is the object of the preposition, and doing this is modifying me. So I thought that this analysis made sense. And to see if it actually did make sense, I posted it to the list. And so Anne, who's working on a grammar project along with some other people, where we're all trying to learn more about grammar. posted, and Anne said, "This is not how I see it. I think that me doing this is a participial phrase that is the object of the preposition of." So Anne's analysis is that this whole thing is the object. The thing about this analysis is that it's not clear to me, under Anne's analysis, what me doing this is modifying, because participial phrases function as adjectives, right? Therefore, how could you have a participial, an object of a preposition, that was a participial phrase? Because as Eliot said in reply, objects of prepositions are nouns. I'm also not sure about what Anne says here, because she says, "It seems wrong to me that doing this would be modifying me, because the likelihood of me doesn't make sense on its own." But often really important information is stuck in a modifier, and you might question whether the writing could be structured better, but just the fact that there's some key bit of information in the modifier doesn't necessarily mean it's ungrammatical. So then Eliot replies, "Objects of prepositions are nouns." Agreed. So I think me doing this is a gerund phrase, not a... So Eliot describes the website's interpretation of this, and he says, "Of me doing this is a prepositional phrase. The object of the noun, the object of is the noun me. Me modified by the participial phrase doing this. Me is modified by the participial phrase doing this, which describes the type of me. It's the equivalent of writing doing this me, which makes it clearer that doing this is being used as an adjective to modify me." I agree with that interpretation of what the website is saying. I don't think that's a good interpretation for this sentence. This is Eliot continuing. Likelihood applies to actions, not objects. So I had to think about that for a little bit, actually. Pause the video, but if you use this equivalent expression and you say, say you say, "The likelihood of doing this me is small," right? That doesn't make a lot of sense, because what are you saying? The likelihood of you existing in a state where you are doing this is small. So I think this writing of it clarifies, this way of thinking of it clarifies the problem. But I disagree with the conclusion, because Because essentially I have an objection to the idea of verbals having subjects. Because that strikes me as interpreting them in such a way where they're both noun and verb. And the position that I found myself advocating on the list recently is that a verbal is rooted in and derived from a verb, but it is whatever it is. Once the form is changed from the finite verb to, or from the finite verb to whatever the verbal form is, if it's an infinitive or a participle or a gerund or whatever, then it is whatever, the verbal is whatever it is now. It's a noun, it's an adjective, whatever the case may be. And so, but where does that leave me with regards to this sentence? Well, I think the logic of the position I've been advocating essentially means I have to reject this sentence as ungrammatical. And I have to just say, do it like this, don't do it like this. Which I think has some benefit besides internal consistency with my own theories of grammar, because it gives you a bright line for how you're supposed to draft this idea in a grammatical way and know that it's kosher. So I just basically wrote that I think the logic of the position I've been recently advocating on list, that verbals are whatever thing they are, noun, adjective, whatever, and can't take things like subjects, compels me to view the likelihood of me doing this as small as just being ungrammatical. So if I want to express the idea there, the idea in that expression in a grammatical way, I have to use my, according to my tentative view. Okay, I think that's good. Like, even if I wind up being wrong, it's good to try and work out the implications of the view, because if you try and work out the implications, maybe you'll see something wrong with it. And that might not happen even the first 10 or 100 things you try and apply it to. You might say, well, that seems okay, that seems okay, that seems okay. But maybe you get to something where you're like, oh, that's a problem. I don't like that. So, but to get there, you have to try and be somewhat rigorous about it and actually note what the implications of your theory are. You have to have an ongoing internal mental process where you're trying to categorize and classify the things subject to the idea in a rigorous analytic way. Like, that's the only way, that's the only reliable way, along with, getting external criticism on those classifications that you make. That's the only reliable sort of process for trying to figure out a fairly complicated topic like grammar. Because grammars are pretty, the principles are simple, but, the principles of lots of things are simple. But then when you get into some of the fine technical details, it becomes a lot more complicated. I'm just going to also say I agree with this view of what the website is saying, and found doing this me a clarifying expression. I'm also going to add, regarding having to view the likelihood of me doing this as small as ungrammatical, I'm just going to say I didn't have a problem with this. Implication. Okay. Alright, we'll send that out. So I'm back on discussing you make him angry. And Anon posted, and so this is what I said earlier, asking what's wrong with this reading. Subject you, verb make, object him, angry modifies him, angry is an adjective. And then Kate said, if you try to explain why angry modifies him, I think you have to say something like, angry tells us how he should be made. And if that's the case, then functionally the word angry is giving us more info about the word make than the word him. Now, I didn't quite get this point earlier, or this idea. But I'm going to read what Anon said here, and then I'm going to talk about an interpretation I just had. So, Anonymous says, Justin proposed reading it like, make him angry. That is what angry as adjective means. That's wrong. And I thought, well, why? And so I thought of a clear case where just consider a simple adjective case, pretty removed from this specific sort of example. So I make cheesy pizza, right? Cheesy is an adjective modifying pizza. Okay. That's fine. Now, consider, by contrast, I make pizza cheesy. Now, that is a sensible sentence. That's a grammatical sentence. You can interpret it in a coherent way. But what does it mean precisely? Well, I think if you fully spell it out, it would mean something like, when I make pizza, I make it in a manner that is cheesy. make it a bit simpler. I make it in a cheesy way. What is in a cheesy way? Actually, to make it even more clear, let's drop the pronoun. So there we go. When I make pizza in a cheesy way. So, what is in a cheesy way? Well, back to basics. This is a preposition in an adverb prepositional phrase tells us in what way. So, I make pizza. How do I make it? In a cheesy way. Adverb. Boom. So, this cheesy is standing for this implied adverbial prepositional phrase. Bring it back to you make him angry. When I say you make him angry, to analogize to the cheesy pizza, you could say something along the lines of, when I make him in an angry way. And obviously, this sounds a bit weird, because this is a standard expression, and this is not. But by make, we have to understand this to mean like bring about, elicit an emotional response, that sort of thing. But I think this is the key thing. In an angry way. And so, within my implied prepositional phrase theory, we see the role of the adjective, and we see why I think this shortcut may have developed, because there's a sort of a standard form that applies, like the in a way stuff is common to many cases, potentially. And so the key bit of data that you need in order to understand this implied prepositional phrase is the adjective, which seems a bit weird because normally it would be, because this way would be the object of the preposition, right? But if it's such a standard thing, it actually does not tell you that much. Although, obviously, whenever you use a shortcut, if you run into trouble interpreting a sentence like you make him angry, then you have to go and unpack it, and that can be quite a project depending on your understanding of grammar and your other skills. But having unpacked it, I think that this explanation makes sense. So I basically just recounted what I talked over, and I summarized as, I think maybe some cases of post-noun adjectives serving as adverbs are basically shorthand adverbial prepositional phrases. The rest of the adverbial prepositional phrase is dropped because the really interesting part of something like in an angry way is the angry part. So you keep that and drop the rest. And thus, an adjective can seem to modify a verb in cases where the adjective is standing for an adverbial prepositional phrase. I just realized I switched pronouns here. Alright, I'm going to send this. I just say, because Anon has an objection regarding completeness in terms of the adverb interpretation. So I asked, thoughts at J's implied prepositional phrase theory? My modified sentences where I try to make stuff more explicit sound complete to me. Okay, so I think the email is complete, at least. Reasonably complete. So in connection with the discussion on verbals and such things, I wrote a long post in which I'd said that I seem to have a fundamental disagreement about how to analyze verbals. And I said that essentially, at least when we're talking about something like, so here's the example I use. Jane loved to sing songs. And I give some different ways to analyze that. And I say, my theory, because I think the view that Anon is taking and other people is that so this whole thing is an object. To sing songs is an object. This is an infinitive, and the infinitive, and so in describing that interpretation, I say, because the issue is, to sing needs to both if you're going to treat songs as an object, then to sing needs to both be like the leader of an object phrase and also take an object. And the way you get there is by having to sing wear two hats depending on the level of analysis you're looking at. And the first hat is like the noun hat. Like if you're looking at the whole sentence, Jane, subject, love, verb, to sing, that would need to be a noun to serve as an object. And so you say that in that respect, to sing is operating as a noun. But if you want to say that songs is also an object, you need something that can take an object which describes a verb. So within its group of words, to sing is functioning like a verb. And I said that a problem with this could be this inconsistent treatment, because it solves a problem, but it's also inconsistent. And so Kate replies, why is that a problem? Within each individual level of analysis, i.e. each context, to sing functions consistently. If you change the context, its function changes. But so what? You change the context. That's a valid point. And it's a very objectivisty point to bring up, so that's appreciated. But I still find it not fully satisfying because, like, I want to know why I want more explanation as to why the inconsistent treatment within each level of analysis is okay. So this is fine, and this was fine to say, and I think I don't have any objection to this, so I'm going to start replying and say that. But I'm still not happy. Right, so Kate sort of elaborates a bit more on that theme. She says, to sing can't be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect. But we're looking at to sing from different respects. So Kate is focusing on meaning, and I think that's where the rubber hits the road here. Because there is a tendency that I, and I think a lot of other people have, to sort of fall into a rationalistic type of analysis. And I think a lot of this has to do with the way that grammar is taught, where it's taught as a system of rules and categorizations and labels, and it's not taught as a system in order to help better your understanding. And so, as a result, there's a strong tendency to want to just, for people who sort of took that type of approach on board, to want to just put a bunch of labels on things and say, I've analyzed the grammars. But that's a mistaken impulse. There's something good about wanting to try and figure out what each part does and try to not be inconsistent and all that sort of stuff. But you want to make sure that's what you're actually doing and not just putting a bunch of labels on things and calling that understanding. It's like that Feynman thing about the difference between knowing the name of the thing and knowing the thing. So, regarding Kate's question, I think the way to think about it is so we've got Jane loved to sing songs. Fine. Did Jane love the song type of singing? Or did Jane love the activity of singing when it involves songs? Consider Justin loved to make pizza. Did Justin love the pizza type of making? Or did Justin love to make stuff when the stuff was pizza? Elliot loved to write blog posts. Did Elliot love the blog post type of writing? Or did Elliot love to write when it involves blog posts? Now, You can say maybe blog is modifying post here, or maybe this is just like a 2-word noun or whatever, but I think you get the idea. So I just added a bit more to clarify what my actual position was. Okay. So basically I concede. I concede this point. This analysis of sentence with B number 8 is a lot of great discussion is happening here. That's cool. Okay. Alright, I'm going to call this video done.